Anna Quindlen's new novel is called Still Life with Breadcrumbs, and that title is taken from a very famous series of photographs that the main character, Rebecca Winter, took when she was a young woman. She photographed, really just took snapshots of the chaos in her own house. She had a small child, so there were toys everywhere, and her husband insisted on bringing his friends home for dinner parties. Even though she didn't particularly want them to come, she was expected just to produce food, and he didn't help at all. The next morning when she wakes up, she sees the chaos of the remnants of the dinner party, including the crumbs from a baguette. So they have ripped up a baguette, and there are bits and pieces of bread and general chaos. She starts photographing it, and this series of photographs become iconic for the women's movement in the 70s and 80s because they represent women's lives. They actually got made into a poster that became very famous. She's now, Rebecca Winter, the photographer, is now in her 60s, and her career has waned a little and money is tight. So she decides she's going to rent out her New York apartment and go and live in a small cottage on the edge of a village out in the woods, really, in New York State. Life's a bit difficult there and a bit lonely. She's trying to have enough money to pay for her elderly mother's rest home because her mother has dementia. When she's there, she ends up meeting a man who's in his 40s, quite a bit younger than her. He's a roofer, so he mends people's roofs, he does plumbing and those sort of jobs. He also works for the American equivalent of doc, looking at birds. So he spends a lot of time sitting up a tree in the middle of the woods, observing birds and making notes about them, and these birds get tagged. And Rebecca ends up getting a job with him photographing the birds. So the two of them get to know each other, perched up a tree, which in itself is quite sort of comical. And one of the things I loved about this novel was the tone of it. It is quite droll. So, for example, one of the chapters early on is called How She Got There, or How She Wound Up There. How She wound up there, the inspirational version. And then there's a chapter called How She Wound Up There, meaning at this cottage in the woods. How She Wound Up There, the money version, so you hear about her money troubles. So there's a very droll tone to the whole novel. And the relationship between these two people is most unexpected, really, and quite beautifully done. I think Anna Quindlen is a very experienced writer who is very good at writing very authentic characters. They're very credible, you feel they're very real. And the age difference becomes irrelevant. They get to know each other as friends, sitting up a tree in the woods, and this friendship develops gradually into something more. Rebecca, meanwhile, while she's hiking in the woods, has come across these crosses. Well, initially just one cross, and then a bit later another cross. A small white cross just on the ground or in a tree, and each cross has something different with it. A doll in one case, a tiny doll, a photograph, a message. And she has no idea who's put these crosses there or what they mean, but she starts photographing them. And you gradually realise that this series of photographs of the white crosses could bring about the sort of the regeneration, really, of her career as a photographer. And they do in fact become the White Cross series, but it's not that simple and straightforward. There are complications about the crosses, and there is quite a major complication in the relationship with this young man up the tree. Well, he's not all that young, he's in his 40s, but up the tree with her. But it gets sorted in a most lovely way, really. I think it deals with some quite serious issues, but there's this lovely droll tone that is really heartwarming. A most enjoyable novel that I highly recommend.